Nicole Smallman and Biba Henry, Sarah Everard, Louise Cam, Sabina Nessa, and Zara Alina. 6 women, 6 high-profile cases from the last couple of years. In fact, last year, 102 women were reportedly killed in the UK by men. An epidemic of male violence. That's how a new report puts it.
At the moment, we're seeing women who have been in the refuge for over a year, some nearly 2 years.
It's an unusual length of time. 6 months is standard. But women aren't able to move on because of the housing crisis. In turn, that means increased need prompted by the cost of living crisis can't really be met.
So we're not able to take women that are fleeing abuse right now into the refuges until there's a space available. And that means that people who really need the support right now aren't able to get it, or might have to look elsewhere, and it might be far out from where they want to go. For a lot of women, there is also a huge fear about leaving, and the cost of living has impacted women financially. The fear of not being able to support themselves if they're dependent on their perpetrators.
In vivid colours, the report paints a bleak picture of economic pressures and a criminal justice system in crisis, misogyny and racism within the police force, and a systemic culture of victim blaming and disbelieving women who have been raped. 66% of survivors surveyed for this report say abusers use the cost of living as a tool for coercive control.
They're controlling, so now I feel at least I'm independent.
This woman is talking about her ex-partner, a violent relationship that she very recently fled. She's in a refuge now, but money worries means she has trouble accessing support services. If you can't get to the centre, what do you miss out on?
Many workshops. They're doing some workshop, and I have to go. It's if you go there, you feel good a little bit. So I missed many workshops because of travel cost.
The report also highlights the impact of structural discrimination. We know that poverty rates are significantly higher within Pakistani, Bangladeshi and black communities. We also know that the vital specialist support for minoritized women and marginalized survivors of abuse are severely underfunded. Think also of the rising running costs for these services and how that impacts demand and care. It's an alarming intersection of issues.
Something that is important to mention also when speaking about Black and minoritized and migrant women is that many of the women we support work in unregulated sectors. They live in very precarious situations. That means they are not only vulnerable to gender-based abuse, domestic abuse, but other forms of violence such as exploitation.
The playroom in the refuge nods to what the children of the women might be going through. The report calls for greater investment in the sector and stronger political accountability.
Well, a little earlier, I spoke to Andrea Simon, the director of the End Violence Against Women Coalition. I began by asking her whether their report, what they describe as an epidemic of male violence, is getting worse.
Well, what we try and do is put out a report every year which looks at the state of violence against women in the UK and what's sort of driving the prevalence of violence and abuse against women. And in the last year, I think we've seen a couple of major factors impacting this, one being the cost of living crisis, and another context around the scale of police perpetrated abuse and the failures of institutions to actually protect women from repeat offenders. So they're certainly things that we are talking about in the context of violence against women and girls right now.
So just unpick those two things. Cost of living, why does it follow that that has an undue impact on women in terms of violence against women?
So the cost of living crisis is obviously affecting all of us, but there's a secondary crisis when it comes to women who are experiencing or at risk of abuse, because they're faced with impossible decisions about staying with perpetrators or facing destitution, because economically they can't survive without living with that perpetrator. So the need to have support services available is utterly vital in this context, and they are already chronically underfunded, and right now they're finding it very difficult to continue running their services whilst the costs of staying open, keeping their lights on, being there for women who need them are going up. So it's really important that we're addressing that.
Is there some hope in that, for example, towards the end of last year, rape convictions went up? Is that a glimmer of hope to cling on to?
I think we need to look at this in the longer term. So we've seen some improvements, but we've also seen the number of reports increasing. And so we're not actually delivering justice or making very much progress very quickly when it comes to the number of cases that are going through the criminal justice system. And when you set that within the huge job that the police now have to do to convince women that they don't have perpetrators within the police force, we're a long way from having that trust and confidence in policing around whether they can actually be trusted to deal with these crimes.
So what do you do about that? Because it's surely going to take years to convince women again to trust the police. How do you go about that? Is it about change at the top or change throughout police forces up and down the country?
It is about very profound, meaningful transformation of the culture of policing. For a very long time, it's been too easy for the wrong people to join the police force and to stay within the police force. And so it is about looking at vettings and standards, but it is actually about addressing a more profound culture of misogyny and racism that we've seen evidence of within our police forces. And until that work starts to embed and show that it is creating change, I think we still suspect there will be more abusers within our police force, and a big job to do to make sure that they are removed.
The government has repeatedly voiced its commitment to combating violence against women and girls and produced a strategy after the death of Sarah Everard, for example. Are you persuaded by that? Are you convinced that the heart is in the right place if there isn't always the follow-through?
We haven't seen the changes that the government have promised when it comes to adequately tackling violence against women and girls happening quickly enough. And we're still reeling from revelation after revelation of abuses within the police force, and the fact that our criminal justice system isn't really handling reports of rape or domestic abuse very well. We still have a very low charge rate. So I think the promises haven't really borne fruit yet.
Andrea Simon, thanks very much.
Thanks, Kathy.